welcome. I'm Daniel, responsible for IT in isHCHome, one of the technical partners. And in this project, I'm the technical integration specialist. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the technological challenges with the platform and take a look at what we have and what we've learned so far, even though we're only halfway through. So before we start, it's good to get on the same page. What do we mean with home hospitalization technology? So what happens when you have a patient who is at home and no longer within the walls of the hospital is that there's a certain distance there. As we saw in Ed's presentation, a lot of things change, and you need to take care and guarantee a lot of things also in the patient's home. So this means that you have to support remote decision making. So how are you going to do that? One key element is to have sensors that can be your eyes and your ears and that provide objective measurements that the patient can operate him or herself. In isHCHome, we measure about 7 different parameters. And looking at this distance, you get a system in between the patient and the caregiver. So the system in between has to provide some kind of interaction, even if it's just transferring data. But ideally, you also want a human connection, for example, with video calling. So key element again. Another thing is that you get new kinds of workflows. You're not making rounds anymore, visiting patients at their bed. Data might be flowing in the whole day. Some of the sensors actually measure 24/7 for days. So you need a way to kind of organize, prioritize this data in order to not become overwhelmed and to still remain efficient in your workflow. On the other hand, as a patient, suddenly you're in your own home, but that also means you're kind of further away from the doctor. Can you be reassured in a way? Does the system give you the feedback to show you that you're doing well, that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing? And below it all, there are many systems, communication, interfacing that make it all work. They have to be monitored, and in particular, there are different players now. You have maybe a long-distance telecommunications provider. You have a vendor that provides the sensor. So these all have to work together. So this is within the context of isHCHome, the technology that we're talking about. So a visual representation of that. On the left, we have the sensors that we use. Weight scale, blood pressure monitor, pulse oximeter, and the chest patch that measures things about the heart, respiration, and movement. There's systems that help the users interact. A smartphone, and at the hospital we have the regular interface, the monitors and the systems that care professionals already use. And there's invisible devices in between. So what makes this difficult? There are a lot of, it's kind of inherent that in such a system you get devices from all these different vendors. So if someone tells you have to make this system with these, I'm going to give you 5, 6 devices. They're not really designed to talk to each other, but please make them talk to each other. Oh, by the way, make it look like one system. We don't want 15 manuals. Oh, by the way, can you also make it so that we can plug in anything that we want that we come up with in the future? I mean, this makes IT people kind of nervous, and when we can't even agree on electrical plug, there's like 15 different plugs. Big challenges on the technological point of view. How do we make it look like one system and feel like one system? How can we make sure that, of course, everything needs to be secure, but we also mean that we want, for example, take the weight scale. How do we know whose weight it is? If there's a weight scale standing around in the room, maybe someone else steps on it. we want to link the data to the identity of the patient and make sure that that data is actually from that patient. And, well, ideally, we want to be able to make it very easy to plug in new devices, even though it's quite a challenge to make it like that. So, in terms of those three challenges, the first one, it's not super obvious to use a consumer device like a smartphone when you think about hospitalization and to make it like a critical component in the chain. On the other hand, it's a very handy device because you can interact with it in a nice way. It has all these communication options for linking devices together, and people carry it with them. So it's very near to the patient, and it's very handy as a kind of a trusted interaction part. So what we did here is that we kind of designed the system so that it assumes the phone will break in some way. Whether it be that it doesn't always have internet, maybe it has some data corruption, so you use mathematical formulas to check the data. And if the phone breaks, you have to be able to just switch in a new phone. So on the patient side, we unify the experience with the smartphone. On the caregiver side, we basically just go with whatever interface the care professional already had, which is usually kind of a bigger screen factor so that it's easier to look at data from different sources and in one view just kind of make your analysis. An added bonus with the platform is that we set it up so that the view that the care professional has, it's now a separate portal so that we can develop with a lot of speed and we're not dependent on hospital IT. But the interface we have is kind of embeddable. We've tested this already with a health system that you can project the interface within the hospital information system. So this is a promise that it will be able to be integrated into the hospital workflow. So that's the user interface. How do we kind of connect the devices into one system? We discovered kind of two different main ways of doing that. Tight integration means that you're using the smartphone or whatever the user is using as the central agent to connect directly to a device. So the blood pressure monitor, the weight scale, and the pulse oximeter, they support Bluetooth, and you get a direct kind of interaction there. The data arrives to the phone, you can see what it is, and it's transmitted. Fairly straightforward, and you'll see this strategy be applicable to many kind of devices that provide some kind of standalone value, so they're sold separately. A more difficult path is when the device cannot be talked to directly by the phone. For example, the patch that we use does not have Bluetooth. So there's no way to transmit the data to the phone. And even if there was, maybe it's undesirable because perhaps you need some advanced processing that's very specific to the hardware of the sensor. So in this case, the sensor has its own transmission mechanism and its own data centers with its own processing. And the way we integrate that into the platform, what we call loose integration, is to link the identity of the patch to the identity of the patient. Very simple technique. You scan the barcode. Almost every product you can put a barcode on. You scan it, and then you make sure that you verify with the vendor that the barcode is valid, that it's actually one of their devices, and then and only then will the device activate and start streaming data. Because at that moment you know where the data should go. Who does it belong to? So on the third aspect of the system, how to make it kind of pluggable or easily extensible. If you start with the idea that you're just going to pick a standard and everybody's welcome to the platform as long as they abide by that standard, it's just not going to work. Different devices already have different interfaces and standards that they support. For example, the weight scale and blood pressure monitor have this very vendor-specific protocol over old Bluetooth and kind of older Bluetooth version. The pulse oximeter is a little bit better because it supports Bluetooth low energy pulse oximeter protocol, so you can switch it out with any other pulse oximeter that supports that. But if you want to go more advanced, you again have to read the vendor manual. For example, if you want the pulse waves to appear in your system, you're not going to get it through the PLX profile. The only place where we really had the freedom to say, hey, this is where we can determine our interface is in the back end, where we chose kind of a middle ground technology or protocol, HL7. This is a very well-known protocol, even though it doesn't exactly specify how you should transfer your data. You still have to talk to each other, but at least it's widely recognized. And even with HL7, it does not provide everything that you need to talk to each other. For example, security is completely out of scope there. So we have a small wrapper around it in a kind of popular JSON format, very popular among developers. So it becomes easy to integrate. The kind of the takeaway of this is that if you kind of plan your system to be multilingual, make the system so that you have little translators on the edge of it that can speak any protocol that you come up with. This is the key to making your system extensible, because when someone discovers a new standard or they just have certain limitations, you can say, okay, I'm just going to put my translator there, and you become part of the system through that. So we're only halfway, but not in my presentation. This is the end. Halfway the project, and there are already a couple of lessons that I think are worth sharing. We talked about tight integration, loose integration, and how to make your system extensible in an easy way, what kind of strategies. But another thing that, so development has gone pretty smooth in this system so far. We haven't really run into very big problems. And I think one of the tools that we used in the beginning of the project, which we called an options appraisal, was very, very helpful in that. So as technicians, technical staff, it's like you always want to know what to build. And nobody ever tells you what they want exactly, or they tell you how to do it instead of what they want. So how do you get this, how do you get clinicians, all these stakeholders together to answer your questions? So the options appraisal helped us in the sense that we had the technical partners sat down together. We had a kind of vague understanding of what was expected of us. We made a story of what the system could look like, giving options here and there where we weren't sure what to pick. And the main action points for the audience of the document, which was the rest of the partners, was that they had to pick either they were informed of which choices there were, and if we picked choices already, then they would just be informed and be able to say like, hey, are you sure you want to do that? Because I have something you didn't think about yet. And there were choices that they had to make for us because they were medical choices or process choices. So this really helped us to go back and forth and to eventually reach a conclusion where we were sure that, okay, at least everybody has seen what the system would look like, and we've made the important choices, and they have been made by the people who are who are best suited to make. So that's it.